Welcome back, everybody. So today I will be making some costillas de puerco en chilito, which is pork meat or pork ribs in a spicy sauce. So here I have 1.5 pounds of the pork fresh rib strips bone in, and I also have boneless pork stew meat at the bottom. I'm going to be chopping up a little bit more because these pieces are a little chunky, and the strips too of the ribs, we're going to be chopping those up as well. I'm going to be using 2.5 tomatoes. This would be 1/4 of an onion, but my onion is super small, so I only have half an onion here. And I have 4 Serrano peppers and 2 yellow, these are like jalapeno peppers, but they're yellow. And we're going to need salt and pepper to taste. Okay, I'm going to get started with the chilies first. I'm going to take the stems off the chilies, and I'm going to just leave them whole, and I'm going to put them in a small pot. And in that pot, we're going to throw in all the chilies. The tops don't come off, just cut them off. And I'm going to slice my tomatoes in half. This kind of helps them cook faster. If you have plenty of time, then you can leave them whole. Also, if your tomatoes are too big, you can always chop them in half and just to help them fit in the pot better. And I'm just cutting the onion in another half here. And I'm going to pour some water. No seasoning goes in there. We're just going to turn it on medium-high heat and let it boil. Okay, moving on to the meat. We're going to slice our meat. We're going to cut it in the chops of the meat depend on how big you want your slices. Also forgot to mention, whenever you're cutting meat, make sure you're using a plastic cutting board, because it's easier to take all the bacteria off after you're done. If you're using a wooden board, that bacteria from the meat is just going to sit inside your board. So this is one piece of the rib. It's got the very fine bone in it. I think I'm going to cut it in another half here. I'm just going to start throwing them in my pot. So this is how big I want my chunks. How big you want yours, it's up to you. That's the beauty of cooking for yourself. We're going to chop this meat up. Let's get through it. Okay, if your meat has too much fat in it, you can go ahead and take it off. I'm not a big fan of the fat in the meat, so as I see it on my meat, as I'm cutting it into smaller pieces, I'm going to go ahead and trim the fat off of it. If you like the fat on the meat, by all means, you can keep it on there. The stew pieces, they're really big, so I'm cutting them into almost bite-sized pieces and tossing them in there. This is the rib meat still, so I'm cutting in between each of the bones. I like this meat, this cut, because it actually has the bone that gives the food flavor, and it also has a lot of the meat in it. This is more more meat than actual ribs, so I'm just going to trim it off. Alright, I have the meat in the pot. I'm turning it on at, I start everything at medium-high heat. Once we get going, we can lower the heat. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add about 1/2 cup of water to the meat. What the water is going to do, it's going to help it cook in between the meat and close to the bone on the pieces that have bone in it. And I'm going to just let it sit here, and I'm going to let that water come to a boil for about, it'll take about maybe 10 minutes or so. So you just want to keep an eye on it. I'm not going to do anything else to it. I'm not going to add seasoning to it until we move on until after the meat has boiled a little bit in that water. You don't want to add a lot of water either, because the meat will release its own juices as well, and we will need to let the water evaporate later. Okay, the meat has been on for about 8 minutes. I'm gonna give it a quick stir, and as you can see, some of that water has already started to evaporate. So we're just gonna give it a quick stir. At this time, I'm gonna add the seasoning. I'm gonna add 2 teaspoons of salt and a teaspoon of black pepper. Again, the salt and the pepper are to your taste. It's up to you how much you want to put on it. So we're going to give it a good, I'm going to do half a teaspoon. And we're going to give it a stir. And we're just going to let it be for now. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to cover the meat, and I'm going to lower the heat to medium-low heat, and I'm just going to let it boil in its own juices to help the cooking process. Now, for our sauce that we're going to be using, if you can see, the chilies still have a little bit of cooking to do. There's parts of it where they're still raw, so we're just gonna let them stay in here for another 5 minutes, and then we're gonna turn off the heat, and we're just gonna let them sit until we're ready to use them for the rest of the meal. All right, let's take a peek here. Oh, sorry, I moved you guys. Okay, so it's got more of the juice that it has released. I'm gonna leave it uncovered now. And we're just gonna let it keep get the water to evaporate some more. This is the water is gonna help it keep cooking, and at the same time it'll end up evaporating, and we don't need the water anymore. Our chilies, tomatoes, and onion are fully cooked, so I'm gonna go ahead and turn off the pot now, and we're gonna let them sit until we're ready to use them for our meat. Alright, so our meat looks like it still has water in it. I'm just giving it a quick stir. I am going to go ahead and turn up the heat to medium heat, and I'm going to let the water finish evaporating before I start pretty much pan frying the meat, because that's what we want. We want a nice pan fried rib and pork stew meat. Okay, so we turned up the heat, gave it a little stir. We'll be back in a little bit once the water starts to evaporate. All right, our water is almost fully evaporated. So what I'm doing is I'm just gonna keep stirring them until I can get them to pan fry. I wanna have that brown color right there, that darker brown color throughout the meat. That's what's gonna give the whole thing flavor. So we're gonna keep stirring them every so often, every 30-40 seconds, and we're gonna let them sit and pan fry for a little bit. And in the meantime, we're gonna take our tomatoes, chilies, and onions and blend them together. All right, I'm gonna take the chilies, the tomatoes, and I'm just gonna use my Ninja cup instead of the whole blender, because, you know, I don't wanna wash a giant blender. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna blend them in, it doesn't all fit, well, maybe it does. Maybe it doesn't. We're gonna blend it with a little bit of the juice. And here we go. I'm just giving it a quick blend because I want to add the rest of it in here. So I'm going to add the rest of my tomatoes, onions, and if there's any chilies left in there. I'm not going to add any more liquid because it'll overflow. I'm gonna add a teaspoon of salt and about a teaspoon of chicken base. And let's blend. Hope it doesn't spill. Okay, it's all blended up. That's the consistency of it. I am going to reserve the rest of the water that we have from the cooking process because I'm gonna add it to my meat as soon as we're ready to add it. All right, check our meat, and it's not completely brown all the way, as you can tell, but if we flip it on the other side, you'll see those brown bits. That's what I'm looking for. You don't have to get it browned all the way on all the pieces. As long as you have the majority of it, it's great. And if you could see all this little stuff down here that got stuck on the on your pot, that's gonna release when we add liquid, and it's gonna give the food so much flavor. All right, here we go. I'm gonna pour some of this liquid that we had left over in the pot in my blending cup. That way it can take out the rest of the stuff that's left over in there. And I'm just gonna add the whole thing. All right, once you've added the liquid, we're gonna stir it and kind of scrape the bottom of your pan. So if you have a stainless steel pot, use a wooden spoon or a plastic spoon. And just scrape off the bottom because that's gonna lift off a lot of the bits of meat that were stuck at the bottom of your pan, and they're gonna blend with the rest of the sauce. So now we're just gonna let it boil for about 10 minutes because you want that flavors of the meat and the sauce to mix together to have a great dish. All right. It just started to boil. I'm gonna give it a little stir, and I'm gonna taste it for salt and see if I need to add more salt. If it's too salty, you can add some more water to it, and that will help correct the taste of the salt. Or if it needs more salt, we'll add some more salt. It's perfect. Nice and spicy too. If it needs more salt, instead of adding salt, I recommend that you add chicken base. The chicken base will give it a better flavor than adding more salt, and it has less sodium than natural salt does. So I'm just gonna let it boil for another 5 minutes, and then I will turn it off, and we'll be ready to eat. Okay, let's serve ourselves. I have some pork ribs in a spicy chili sauce. So I'm gonna pour some of these in here. Look at how yummy that looks. And some of the juice. And our freshly made beans. I'm gonna add a little bit more of the juice in here. So how does that look, you guys? It's a typical Mexican dish that you can make at home now.